In the following video project, we will cover the physicality of tiny homes, such as materials used, environmental impact, and longevity, how the tiny home communities differ from traditional homeless shelters, as well as how they affect the homeless who reside in them, while keeping in mind both negative and positive effects. Toward the end of this project, we will explain what must change to achieve the goals of tiny home projects. To begin, a tiny home is a small building with most of the functionality of a full-size house. All tiny homes have beds, windows, and a solid frame to keep the outside elements from getting in. Some tiny homes have sinks and kitchens, but the average tiny home provided for the homeless are called pod models, which only contain individual sleeping areas. A tiny home community, also referred to as a tiny home village, is a neighborhood-like space that provides homeless individuals with the resources they need to acquire stable housing. We will cover the details of these tiny villages later on in this piece. A tiny home village differs from a traditional homeless shelter because each individual gets their own pod to stay in. They are less populated, cleaner than many shelters, and they give privacy and independence to the occupants. Some typical homeless shelters house over 100 people in one space. This can lead to tension between individuals, illness, and general discomfort. In an interview conducted by KGW News, a homeless Portlander said that he does not hang out in the shelters because he does not feel safe in them. Many shelters are overnight only, so the homeless will go there to sleep but then have nowhere to be during the day. Providing the homeless population with tiny home villages prevents these problems.
Next, the two categories of goals for these communities are environmental and social. The environmental goal of tiny home villages for the homeless is to create housing only using recycled or repurposed material, no new material. This goal is achievable by contacting local craftsmen, warehouses, and by holding donation events to obtain said materials. The social goal of tiny home villages for the unhoused population is to give them a clean, safe place to stay in while they search for permanent housing. Tiny home villages typically have social work and housing resources to set goals for each individual and support them as they grow. To reach both social and environmental goals, people must have access to tiny homes and villages. To become part of a tiny home community, some sites, for example, the Agape Village, require the unhoused individual to fill out an application, have an interview, and conduct a background check. Other communities, like the Safe Rest Villages program, may only take in new residents by referral of social services. Most programs also require the residents to be sober and have goals to improve their lives towards permanent housing.
The weakness of the tiny home idea is that they need to provide lots of support for both the tenants and staff to be successful. A failed tiny home project is A Place for You by Multnomah County. Multnomah County offered to give homeowners a free tiny home in their backyard if they would house a homeless person for 5 years. 1,000 people applied, and a minuscule number of 4 people were selected for the program. Each tiny home averaged about $100,000 to build. One volunteer shared how the once homeless family who stayed in the backyard tiny home moved out within 2 years. Program organizers failed to support the families who housed the tiny homes. Lastly, the city took back their initial offer of a free tiny home and now expect the homeowners to pay. The disorganization and lack of support failed this tiny home plan before it even had the chance at being successful. Another weakness among homeless tiny home villages is that there is racism and misogyny present in many. According to the Homelessness Research and Action Collaborative, villages have disproportionately served white men. 17% of villagers in the studies identified BIPOC, despite BIPOC residents representing 40% of the unsheltered population in Portland. To counter this, there is some fight for equality. One shelter named Afro Village is fighting against racism and misogyny by opening its doors to Black women entering from homeless and incarceration.
For the environmental impact, some tiny home communities use donated, upcycled, and reclaimed materials to construct the pod homes. Although not all communities use repurposed materials, if more do, then this could help the environment greatly. Additionally, illegal street camps often result in waste that is improperly disposed of. In an interview conducted by KGW News, a homeowner of 16 years, moved her and her son to Tigard after repeatedly finding hypodermic needles on the sidewalk. The single camp cost about $18,000 to clean up. As for potential societal impact, the success rate from homeless to having permanent housing differs from village to village. The ones that provided strong support for their community have a much higher rate of success.
So what needs to change systematically? Good tiny home programs are rare to find due to the lack of funding, commitment, and community support. It appears that funding is available through the American Rescue Program, as about $200 million were provided to the city of Portland, but the funds were not being used in productive ways. There are many programs that provide food and temporary housing, but not all of them successfully support the next steps to find housing. Lastly, the community support needs to be encouraged and implemented reliably. Community is a huge factor for these programs because it encourages houseless individuals to push themselves, and if they feel hopeless or alone, that they have support no matter what.
Overall, the goals of tiny homes for the homeless are still a work in progress. The key takeaway is that independence, privacy, and community support are needed for success. When done right, tiny home programs are successful in guiding the unhoused to stable housing.